Welcome to Doctors Unbound, your show devoted to doctors who are, well, unbound by physician stereotypes. Get a behind-the-scenes look at doctors that are breaking the mold and breaking into the worlds of technology, writing, investing, politics, just to name a few. This is Doctors Unbound, where you'll hear from experts with the insights to help you go to the next level. Let's get this show started. Here is your host, Dr. Dave Draginas.
You're listening to Doctors Unbound. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate your support and your listening. In this episode, we cover some ground that we haven't covered on this show before, so I'm really excited about that. Topics related to medical leadership that, like I said, we just haven't broken on this show before, and it's really, really good. Some of the stuff that I'd like to highlight for you to be sure to listen for are this guest's 5 steps to move into medical leadership positions if you're interested in that. What the hospital C-suite is thinking that every physician should definitely know. What is a certified physician executive? We get into all the details on this show once again. And how about stacking skills? Are you familiar with stacking skills? We get into exactly what that means and which skills physicians should be stacking to supercharge their career growth. Let's see, what else? We get into using social media, things like LinkedIn, to explore new business ventures, and the story of how our guest basically used LinkedIn to score a brand new partnership where he is the medical director and has ownership in that venture. And finally, how to analyze these new ventures using key members that should already be within your personal network. Again, like I said, a lot of really, really great content in this episode. I really hope you enjoy it. Here we go. Welcome to another episode of the Doctors Unbound podcast. Today, I'm super excited because we've got Dr. John Jurica, who is a board-certified family physician, entrepreneur, and certified physician executive. He has owned his own medical practice, worked as medical director in several settings, then as a senior hospital medical executive for 15 years. He's now the medical director and part owner in a startup urgent care center outside of Chicago. In his spare time, he also publishes a blog and is a podcaster as well. As you can see, there's a lot of awesome things in there that we haven't necessarily touched yet on our podcast. So I'm very excited for John. Dr. Jurica, welcome to the show.
Hello, David. I'm glad to be here.
Fantastic. We're going to jump right into it. And as you probably know, in the first part of the podcast, we're going to get to know a little bit more about you. And one question that I always have is about morning routines. Do you have a morning routine? And if so, is there anything that you wish you might be able to change about it?
Yeah, I do have a morning routine. It's very minimalist and it's very boring. So on days when I'm working in the clinic, which is a 12-hour shift, I get up at about 4:30, 4:45.
That's early.
Yeah, I'm an early bird in general, but I get up early, let the dog out, let the dog in, have a cup of coffee, and sit down. And, well, if I'm working, I just get ready for work and I hop in the car and I head up to the clinic. I'm working now about 10 shifts a month. So on those mornings when I'm not working a shift, then I get up at 5:30 and let the dog out, have a cup of coffee, and probably just sit down and write. Either I'm going to write something for the blog or prepare for the podcast. And, well, I try not to check my email all that often. Then if I get those things done, I don't have anything hanging over my head, I'll maybe check out the emails. But that's basically it. It's kind of boring, but that's how it goes.
Quick question for you. Do you prepare what you're going to work on the night before? Like if you're going to write something for the blog?
I'm a big list maker and a to-do list user, and so oftentimes I will make a list of the top 2 or 3 things I'm going to do the next day. So if I happen to, get off track, then yeah, I'll look at that and get focused. And I'm a little more creative in the morning, so yeah, I'll do that. I do that at work quite a bit too, especially when I was working in the hospital. I would always have to-do lists of the top 2 or 3 things for the next day.
Okay, I'm seeing that as a trend among my guests here and kind of top performers here. Very, very interesting. How about a favorite food or drink that you might enjoy?
Well, let's see. Again, pretty boring. I became a vegetarian about 4 years ago. I used to love, meat, but I decided to stop eating meat. So I don't have a great list of foods except desserts now. That's what's left. So it's chocolate, yeah, and tiramisu and key lime pie and things like that as far as food goes. And then coffee would have to be the number one drink. If it's an alcoholic beverage, it's going to be probably a Moscow Mule because I like ginger beer.
Gotcha. Now, is there a particular reason why you decided to go vegetarian?
I guess I kind of made the mistake of watching a movie called Forks Over Knives, and between the association with colon cancer and other conditions which are somehow related or triggered by animal proteins, and I guess a little bit of the fact that I don't like the idea of necessarily slaughtering animals, although it's not a big deal for me. I wear leather shoes and belts and so forth, but I just thought, okay, I'm going to try this. I have a very high cholesterol, and I'm going to try and get in shape, and I'm going to stick to the vegetarian diet and see how it goes.
Okay, and how long have you done it, and how have you felt?
I feel pretty good. I've been doing it for at least 4 years. I had tried it previous to that. My whole family had, and they've all kind of jumped off that bandwagon, but I've continued it, so I feel good.
Okay, awesome. And how about a hobby that you like to do when you're not working?
So the main hobby that I do is I play the acoustic guitar. I took that up about 15 or 17 years ago, and I got into bluegrass guitar. That's why I chose the music that I did for my podcast.
Okay.
And so I practice on my own. I get together with friends. Sometimes I perform for a local independent living center. And while, bluegrass isn't actually my favorite music, it's the favorite music that I play on the guitar because it's kind of like jazz. You get to improvise, so it's kind of fun.
Yeah, it seems like it's a very good creative outlet in that sense.
If you look around, you can find a place to jam with complete strangers within 10 minutes of pretty much any major metropolitan area in the country. So it's kind of fun that way. And so occasionally I'll go to jams and just step in a group and play and have a good time.
Wow, that's awesome. All right, we're going to move on here a little bit more to some of the questions related to your work and your skills. And I remember reading something recently where you commented about being approached on LinkedIn to partner in an urgent care venture. So I was hoping that you could tell that story to our audience here because I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from it.
Okay. Yeah, it was a little bit unusual, a little bit unexpected. I'd been working for about 15 years as a senior hospital executive, and I kind of got the idea that, I might be ready for one more career change. I tend to like to do new things on a regular basis, so even though the job was good, it was fun, it was very rewarding, I thought, well, I might try something else. And at the same time, I wanted to do something where if I sort of phased into retirement, I could do it part-time.
Uh-huh.
And you can't really do CMO work, chief medical officer work part-time. So I thought, well, maybe I'd be looking for something. So I wasn't actively looking, but I did spruce up my LinkedIn profile to make it maybe a little more attractive. Now, if you know about LinkedIn, there's basically 2 ways to find jobs. And one is you can use the LinkedIn Jobs app, which is part of LinkedIn, and you can put you can actually search for jobs on there. But the other way is just simply to use your profile and let other people find you. Because, that's what LinkedIn really is. In part, it's just a big social network where you can put your profile and interact with others who may be offering or looking for jobs. So I did that. Didn't really have anything specific in mind. And a businessman, MBA kind of guy, just reached out and contacted me. And so I said, okay, well, what's going on? Well, he had been working in private equity. He had worked for hedge funds and doing company analysis and private equity investments and so forth. And one of the things he was involved in studying was healthcare. And so he became enamored with the whole urgent care field.
Uh-huh.
And there's a ton of consolidation that's been going on in the last, I don't know, about 10 years or so. And he saw it as a big opportunity. So he actually spent 2 years studying it with the idea of opening his own urgent care center. He had a business plan. He had all kinds of pro formas. And so he reached out to me and asked me if I'd like to talk to him. I said, sure. So we had some conversations over LinkedIn, over email. Then we started meeting. He lives about an hour from where I'm living. And so we met, and that just started it. And it seemed like a possibility after I got some initial questions answered. So he provided me a copy of the business plan, his pro formas, a projection for 1, 5, and 10 years. He gave me a copy of a marketing analysis that had been done of the areas around Chicago. And after I looked at all that, I decided to move forward.
Okay. I want to touch up just on a few questions. What did you do specifically to spruce up your LinkedIn profile to be more attractive for these types of opportunities?
Well, I tried to make it as complete as I could. There's a lot of sections in the LinkedIn profile. You've got the whole narrative at the top, which can be, I don't know if there's even a cap on it, but it's the biggest part of the profile.
Yeah, it's very big.
So I just put in everything that I had done. I kind of focused a little bit on maybe some of the entrepreneurial things I'd been involved with, the fact that I had started my own practice after leaving a group. I might have even mentioned in there that I helped my wife open a new franchise, that kind of thing. And then I made sure that I was requesting people to provide recommendations or endorsements, which are on there. So if you look on there now, I probably have over 400 endorsements for various skill sets. Mm-hmm. Make sure all the employment part was there. And then the keywords in there. So entrepreneur, understanding finance, accounting, leadership, things like that. Just kind of wove that into the narrative, basically. I never did ask him what attracted him, but he did some kind of a search, which you can do on LinkedIn, and you're looking for certain types of individuals with a certain background and certain keywords in their narrative, and he just searched and tracked me down.
Very cool. So he found you on LinkedIn, which, can be another great resource for physicians, depending on what they're looking for. And then obviously there was a vetting out process, and it sounds like, you guys met eventually in person and kind of really got into the details of this potential partnership.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And in the end, what did it result in? Did you end up, it sounds like you ended up moving forward with this partnership. What did that look like for you as far as position in this new venture? Was there a financial investment? Kind of, what are you comfortable sharing with us with that?
Yeah, no, I eventually worked out. It took about 6 months. And just, I might want to mention this too. I had my accountant look through everything, my attorney, and I actually had my accountant do a comparison of a present day value of my earnings for the next 10 years, comparing what I was doing as a CMO versus what was possible with this venture. So, it's not really set in stone, obviously, but it looked like it was going to be favorable. So I went ahead, by virtue of signing on, I was granted a certain number of shares, and then it was required that I purchase some shares. So I think I own somewhere around 10% of the company. He owns about 60%, and we have 5 other really passive investors. Mm-hmm. So even based on that, with the idea being that we were going to have this clinic, open it for a couple of years, and then eventually try and open 2, 3, or 4, and eventually have 5, and then at that point try to sell the whole network and just cash out. So that was a high level plan. So yeah, I mean, it made sense financially. There's always some risk there, and actually the growth rate has not been exactly what he projected, and that's one learning which I really should have known, and I did know that most of the time when you're looking at projections for an investment, they always tend to be on the more optimistic side. And
gotcha.
There's just expenses, things happen, whether you have a hurricane or a tornado or whatever, something happens, it's going to throw, a wrench in the works. But I mean, all in all, it's worked pretty well. I mean, we went from basically zero patients, and we're now seeing, between 40 and 50 a day, and some days we see up to 60. So,
oh wow,
we're growing, but we don't have a second site yet. So I still have to reassess, my participation. It's been 3 years now, so that's kind of where we stand.
I see. And are you medical director of that particular site, or?
Yeah, I'm the medical director. So, I had to put together the policies and procedures, everything having to do with the clinical side of the practice, and he pretty much takes care of all of the non-clinical side, whether it's billing and insurance and staffing and so forth. So and actually because we're in a state that is pretty strict on the corporate practice of medicine, I don't know if you have that in Texas, but it basically says that a non-physician or hospital entity cannot employ a physician directly. So we have a situation where I actually set up a single member LLC under me. He has the management company, but everything flows through it, and so it's a little convoluted, but it's still, at the end of the day, it's like we just basically went in together to open this clinic and ultimately hope to expand it to 2 or 3 in the near future.
Okay, very cool. Well, thank you for sharing all those details. I think just hearing the story is very valuable, but then also some of the things that you did, like having your accountant and your attorney look at it. First of all, the foresight to do that, and secondly, to have those pieces in place. I think it's so important for physicians to surround themselves with a team of valuable resources like that.
Oh, you have to do it, and in spite of me looking at numerous P&Ls and balance sheet in a hospital setting, it's completely different when you're looking at some kind of entrepreneurial venture. It's just a different world, really.
For sure. One thing that I want to touch on in this interview with you is medical leadership. What advice would you give to physicians who are looking to move into that type of a role?
Well, let's see. Leadership is a large area, but basically there's various things you can do if you're interested in pursuing. So let's say you're in practice. You've been in practice 5 years or 10 years. You're in a group or you're solo. It really doesn't matter. You're employed by a hospital. And you're kind of looking at, maybe I want to do a little bit more. I believe physicians are natural leaders, not that they're born leaders, but by virtue of our education and what we've gone through to get where we are as practicing physicians, there's a lot of leadership concepts that are built in there.
Right.
Teamwork and so forth. But there's a lot of things you have to learn that are a little different once you step up into a formal leadership role. So if I were to advise somebody that's thinking of moving in that direction, I'd probably have 4 or 5 pieces of advice. One is let people know that you're interested in that. So it's just having the mindset and getting the word out that you're interested.
Uh-huh.
The second would be to gain some experience however you can just to get started. So what that means is just volunteering a lot. Volunteering on committees at your hospital and your medical group, volunteering on specialty society committees, getting involved. If you can get onto nonprofit boards, hospital board, anything like that, you're going to get a lot of leadership experience that's not going to cost you anything except some time.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can think about getting some formal education or training. Again, a lot of the specialty societies offer, physician leadership training geared specifically for their members. But you've got organizations like the American College of Healthcare Executives and the American Association for Physician Leadership that do really formal training in leadership. And then at some point, once you're starting to get exposed to it, then you might think about getting a certification or a degree. The other thing I would do along the way is network and find mentors to help you in that process. So once you've said, okay, I want to be a leader, what kind of leader do you want to be? Well, I want to be a medical director of something. Well, okay, let's find a medical director who can be your mentor and explain how he or she achieved that goal. Or you want to be a CMO. Okay, well, find a CMO to be your mentor and just have a conversation from time to time and get their insights. So that would be the other thing I would do along the way.
Yeah, I think that's super key, is to find a mentor specifically to what it is you're trying to achieve, who's been there, done that, and can really shortcut that path for you.
Absolutely. And even if you get mentors from different fields, if you haven't quite decided in what area you want to, show your leadership skills or express your leadership skills, and then over time you'll narrow it down and you'll focus on that one mentor, or maybe get a mentor who's even further down the path to that career choice.
Okay, very cool. kind of a related question, but for physicians who maybe are interested in leadership positions at a hospital, but even for the physician workforce out there, any insights as to what the hospital C-suite is thinking that you think every physician should know?
That's a kind of a loaded question, but the good, the bad, and the ugly of what the C-suite is thinking. There's several things that I think are pretty consistent. The C-suite and the board of a hospital wants to achieve its mission, so we know that. I think most people that run hospitals and health systems are dedicated and committed, and they want to, achieve that mission, which is taking care of patients. Having said that, I could say that there's a couple of things that go through their mind on a daily basis, and I could paraphrase it this way: expenses bad, revenues and profits good. So, I mean, it's kind of a funny way to express it, but ultimately they have to have a business that's going to survive. So they have to try and figure out how to achieve the mission, yet still balance the expense side of the equation, how to look for growth, which is key to almost every organization, and generate the revenues and profits. And they're always looking for physician leaders, in my opinion. They're always looking for physicians that can help them to get that message across to the physicians who are on staff or the physicians who are employed. And so I think that's where the physician leader in the hospital setting comes in, is to be able to straddle that fence and to understand the needs of the CFO and the COO of the hospital, and yet at the same time bring the physicians along and let them understand that while it sometimes seems like we're at odds over things, the bottom line is we're all trying to provide the best care for patients. So I think the C-suites are looking at things that way, but in each system, there are various levels of comfort with physicians giving more control. I'm a big believer in more physician leadership. We need more physician leaders in general. We need more physician leaders in hospitals. And so you have to kind of assess how comfortable. Most big systems obviously have physicians in leadership positions already, but some of the smaller ones really are just putting their toe in the water with that, at least meaningful leadership.
Right. All right. Well, thank you. I think that's a good answer, and it gives us kind of the lens through which we should be taking into account as well. What's going on at the hospital. I'm going to move on a little bit here, and to this concept of stacking skills. You recently had an article on your site, vitalpe.net. That's your site that you blog at, and it was about stacking skills to be able to essentially kind of supercharge your professional growth. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about what that means and which of these skills are important for physicians to stack?
I'm not sure the final answer is in on this, but this is a term that was coined by Scott Adams. He's known as the creator of Dilbert, but he's an MBA, he's an entrepreneur, he's a social media expert, he's an author.
He predicted Trump.
He predicted Trump. Right? I didn't want to mention that. But,
well, I'm not saying that he was for it necessarily, but he was
right.
He was predicting a victory, I think, about a year or so out, which I found him on Twitter, and that surprised me because that was back when I really didn't think Trump had a chance. And here was this guy who was talking about Trump as a persuader, and I just kind of tracked him from then on, and it was very intriguing, some of the things that he was saying, just to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. And he has these different concepts that are a little bit at odds with what we usually think. But one of them is this idea of systems rather than goals, and the other is this system. One of the systems is stacking skills. And so this is what I took from it, and what I wrote about is that if you already know that you want to do something more, maybe a little beyond clinical medicine, or maybe you want to do clinical medicine in a different way. And you may not know exactly where you want to go, but one thing you can do from a system standpoint is learn new skills that are likely to be useful in the future, even not knowing what you're going to be absolutely doing. So there are a number of, let's say, generic skills that he mentions in his book, in several of his books, but the ones that I kind of adopted for use by physicians would be things like the following. Now, first I'll say that physicians already have a lot of leadership skills. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, they do teamwork, they do teaching, lifelong learning. So that's good. But from a generic skill set, I would say things like this: public speaking, using ubiquitous tools like Excel and PowerPoint, which some physicians, oddly enough, don't know how to use. Writing is a good skill to get better at. You don't have to master any of these skills. You just have to get better at these. Learning certain accounting skills, reading a P&L and a balance sheet, knowing an accrual-based, accounting system versus cash-based. Second language wouldn't hurt. If you already have one, that's fantastic. Healthcare law, running effective meetings, knowing how to do goal setting and tracking goals and project planning. That would be a short list, so to speak, of skills that would be good almost across the board.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I've heard that idea, maybe not quite in that same manner, but I've heard a couple people talk about similar ideas, and I think it makes a lot of sense.
And then if you start adding things like whether it's coding and documentation or utilization review or other things, then you start to get more focus on specific careers. But I think it makes good sense. And actually, when you are involved in things like these volunteer activities I talked about earlier, like nonprofit boards and so forth and committees, a lot of these you learn doing that, so that it kind of all meshes together.
Got it. I think in a previous answer, we talked a little bit about maybe looking for certifications, which related to medical leadership. I wanted you to talk a little bit about certified physician executive. What does that mean? Kind of what does that entail?
Well, that is a designation that was created by a organization. It's called the Certifying Commission on Medical Management, which is really it was created by the AAPL, but it's a separate subsidiary that puts this designation out there. And what it does is it recognizes physicians who have devoted significant time to these activities of learning to be better leaders, better executives, and so forth. So the requirements are that you have to be board certified, you have to be in practice, I think, at least 3 to 5 years. You have to have 1 year of formal leadership. So just serving on a committee doesn't really count, but formal leadership. And then you need 150 hours of formal leadership training, some of which can be substituted by a business degree like an MBA or an MHA or something like that. So you accrue all of these prerequisites, and then you attend a 3.5 or 4 day meeting of the CCMM, and you're broken into little groups, and you have projects and assignments, and you have to do videotapes and show your speaking skills and so forth. And at the end of all that, if you pass that final capstone, they call it, then you get the CPE designation. I don't know. I think there's only a few hundred that have been approved so far through the AAPL, and it's interesting. I think it's the process that really is significant, not so much the designation, but I have been seeing that designation on job postings recently. It's usually not a requirement, but it's like a nice to have, CPE preferred. So I was a little surprised by that.
And once you attain that designation, is that something that requires maintenance, or is that kind of once you got it, you got it?
There is a certain level of maintenance. It's a 10-year designation. Now, if you become a fellow of the American Association for Physician Leadership, I think they waive the 10-year recertification requirement. So they kind of use that as a lever to encourage you to do some of the other things that would indicate involvement in leadership, and specifically with the AAPL.
Okay. Well, we've covered a lot in today's talk. But I wanted to leave a little bit of time for you to talk to us a little bit about your blog, your website, and also your podcast. So would you just take a few moments to tell our audience a little bit about that, kind of what the goals are and how that's going for you? Okay.
Yeah. The blog is called Vital Physician Executive. Vitalpe.net is the URL. And I started that about 1.5 years ago. I generally do weekly blog posts, although they've kind of slowed down a bit since I started the podcast. But they're generally they're about leadership. Mainly it's to help medical group and hospital executives manage and lead better, basically. So it's from my experiences as a chief medical officer. Sometimes I get into the weeds of patient safety and quality improvement and so forth. And other times I just talk about basic leadership principles or provide links to other articles that I find interesting on physicians in leadership positions and so forth. But I became intrigued by this concept of non-clinical careers for physicians, one of which is, of course, becoming a hospital executive or a medical group executive. And so I decided, well, why don't I do something along those lines? So I started the Physician Non-Clinical Careers podcast, and that was about 2 months ago. And this podcast is made up basically half solo episodes, half interviews, but I'm always trying to provide, I guess, inspiration and information and support for physicians who really have made the decision to seek a non-clinical career, at least part-time, if not full-time. So that's basically what it's about. Now, that can be found at vitalpe.net/PNC-podcast. It's actually sort of a part of the blog, but it has its own page and so forth where you can find that.
All right, very cool. And we'll definitely link up to all of those in the show notes.
Well, that'd be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, for sure. And we're kind of rounding into the last part of the interview here. What is one thing or one action that you would like listeners to take today?
Well, I'm kind of just obsessed with this idea of physicians having a fulfilling career. So, and not being burnt out, of course, which is something we hear about constantly, which is, again, why I kind of write about this in the blog and talk about it on the podcast. So I guess the one action that I would advise our listeners do is that if they're unhappy with their current situation, if they have symptoms of burnout and so forth, then I would just sit down and write down 3 steps that you can take over the next few weeks to fix that, to take control, to change your circumstances, and to try and, forge a way out of that sort of burnout or dissatisfaction or what have you. So that would be fantastic if you could do that.
I think that's good advice if anybody's feeling that way. How about one thing that you wish you did or had gone differently in your career so far?
Well, I was thinking, this is interesting. I guess what I would do differently, knowing what I know about myself now, is I would be less self-reliant, which sounds kind of interesting. But
I think a lot of doctors have that tendency.
Yeah, I mean, it gets back to this issue of mentors and networking. If I could go back, that's what I would do differently. I would identify mentors and interact with mentors. I would network more and interact more and just use other people to help support what I'm doing instead of sitting out here like I have in the past and just sort of trying to be completely self-reliant. It's not really, and that's what I think adds to burnout and some of these other issues that I mentioned earlier. So that would be the one thing I would change in myself too.
Well, I think that's a tendency for a lot of physicians for some reason. So I think that is very apropos here. And just I would add that I see that tendency in myself too. And in trying to grow this podcast, I definitely see the need and the benefit for networking to be able to do that more effectively. So I think regardless of what you want to do, it's going to be hugely important.
Yep. And it's nice that some people know that naturally. And like you said, a lot of physicians don't get that.
Right. Is there one resource other than your own that you would recommend to our audience?
Well, I think I'm going to go a little bit off the wall here. You know how I kind of like the Scott Adams books and things and that. So I'm kind of interested in different ways of looking at things. And there's someone you may be familiar with, and I'll say the one resource would be Tim Ferriss.
Okay.
I would say, start with 4-Hour Work Week and work your way up through the rest of his books and read about fear setting and look at his blog and podcast. And then The Tools of Titans is a recent book. And there's a lot in there that can be inspirational. There's a lot of hacks. There's a lot of just things that we can apply as physicians. But I don't think most physicians are sitting down to read or listen to Tim Ferriss, from what I know.
Yeah, I definitely have his podcast in my rotation. The sort of interesting story there is years ago I was introduced to Tim Ferriss, and it was the 4-Hour Work Week by another physician friend. And when I got the book, I looked at it, and I was very skeptical because the cover I would have never bought myself. It just looked very scammy.
Right. It sounds scammy too.
It sounds scammy. The cover looked scammy. I know Tim tested it out, and there was a reason behind why it looked the way it did. But for me, that would have prevented me. But fortunately, I had this physician friend, Kevin, thank you so much, who recommended it. And once I picked it up and started reading it, then a lot of these ideas really started clicking for me. And I've read some of his other books. I follow his podcast. So I think that's a great resource for physicians to check out.
Yeah, and send us an email if they like it, just to reinforce what we're saying.
Right. And now we'll end with the last question here. The one place that you would fly to tomorrow if there were no commitments and infinite resources.
Well, I'm tempted to say Mars, but I'm going to say that's not realistic. So here's what I'm going to say to that. I've never been one to have like much of a bucket list, but what I would do if I had the resources now, the time and the money, is I would actually revisit a place that I visited once before. About 18 years ago, two friends and I went trekking in the foothills of the Himalayas, and we flew into Kathmandu, and then we trekked up the mountain for about 7 days. And if I had the physical strength, time, and money, I'd do it again. Let's put it that way.
Wow, that sounds like it was pretty awesome, and it sounds like you're left with good experiences, especially if you would revisit it once again.
Yeah, I'd recommend it. You can get to Kathmandu. It's not that difficult, but I definitely would do it again.
Very cool. And finally, where can people get in touch with you?
Well, there's links on the blog and the podcast, but you can email me directly at johnjurica@vitalpe.net. And then you can find me on LinkedIn, of course. Just put my name in LinkedIn and I'll pop up, and you can message me there or contact me that way.
All right. Awesome. Well, Dr. John Jurica, thank you so much for another great podcast on Doctors Unbound.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening to Doctors Unbound podcast. Remember to head over to doctorsunbound.com to access all the show notes and resources discussed in this episode. Now, it's your turn to be unbound.